I've always been fascinated by history and the mysteries that lay hidden in ancient sites. And tonight, I was about to explore one such place, a chamber that was said to hold many secrets. I knew it wasn't allowed to enter this place after dark, but my curiosity got the better of me. So, I made my way to the chamber, and as soon as I entered, I was struck by its size. The walls seemed to go on forever, and the darkness was so thick, I had to use a torch to see. As I walked deeper and deeper into the chamber, my excitement grew. I was about to discover something amazing, I could feel it. That's when I saw it, a light beam coming from a room behind the chamber. I couldn't resist the temptation to see what was inside that room, so I made my way towards it. As I got closer, the room became brighter and brighter, and that's when I saw them, people standing still, like statues. At first, I was intrigued. Who were these people? Why were they standing so still? But as I got closer, my curiosity turned into fear. These people weren't moving at all. They were frozen in time. I walked through the group of people, looking at each one of them. They all had their eyes closed. But then I saw it. One of them had their eyes wide open, and the pupils were looking straight at me. I was freaked out. What kind of place was this? I turned around to leave, but then I heard a voice, a whisper. "You're not supposed to be here." I froze. Who was that? Was the guy with eyes open talking to me? I didn't want to find out. Fear overtook me, and I started to run, but then I heard the whisper again. "You can't leave now." I kept running, faster and faster, not looking back until I was out of the chamber. When I finally stopped, I was out of breath and shaking with fear. I knew I had to leave and never come back to that place again. But as I walked away, I suddenly felt weaker and weaker. At first, I thought it was just tiredness from running, but then I realized something was wrong. My feet wouldn't move, and then my legs froze. Soon, my wrists, arms, hands, and even my neck were all immobilized. I was paralyzed, frozen like the people in the room. As panic set in, I saw a shadow on my right side appear. It picked up my entire body and carried me back into the deep recesses of the chamber. I was helpless, unable to move or even scream for help. The shadow brought me to the room where the people were standing still, and I saw that their eyes were all open now. They were staring at me, and I could feel their silent judgment. The shadow placed me among them, and I felt a coldness wash over me. I was trapped, frozen in time with the others. I was now one of them, another statue in the ancient chamber, lost to the world forever.
One night, I was at home doing my tax when I heard a knock on my door. I was surprised as it was very late, and I couldn't imagine who would be visiting at this time. Curiosity got the better of me, and I walked to the door to look through the peephole. To my surprise, there was a chubby guy dressed as Santa Claus outside, and his face looked creepy with a dirty beard. The Santa costume was red, but the color seemed uneven and poorly dyed. I started to feel scared, wondering what his intentions were. He asked me to open the door, but I was hesitant and asked him what he wanted. He said he had a package to give me, but he wouldn't reveal its contents until I opened the door. I refused to open the door, and that's when he let out a horrifying laugh. I threatened to call the police, and he dropped the package in front of my door before running away. I was confused and scared, but didn't want to open the door to check on the package in case the Santa guy was still around. I called my dad, who arrived 15 minutes later, but did not find any package at my door. I was sure that no one had come to my door as I kept looking through the peephole while waiting for my dad. Eventually, we called the police, but they couldn't find any trace of the strange guy. However, later that year, when I paid my taxes, I was surprised to find out that my tax payment had already been made, and I was refunded the full amount. I wondered who could have paid my taxes for me, and that's when I remembered the strange Santa guy. Could he have left a gift for me? The mystery remains unsolved, and I still wonder about the strange guy in the Santa Claus costume.
I arrived at the open house with the realtor, a tall, thin man with a friendly smile. The house was massive, with a long driveway leading up to it and a sprawling lawn surrounding it. The realtor began to lead me through the house, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the sheer size of it. As we made our way through the house, I realized that it was like a maze. The hallways twisted and turned before reaching another room, and it was easy to get disoriented. Despite this, the realtor walked quite fast, and I found myself struggling to keep up with him. Suddenly, the realtor turned a corner and disappeared from view. I tried to catch up, but when I turned the corner, he was gone. I called out his name, but there was no response. I began to walk around the house, calling out for him, but he was nowhere to be found. As I walked around the house, I started to get scared. The house was so big, and it was easy to get lost. The hallways all looked the same, and I couldn't remember which way I had come from. I tried to find a way out of the house, but every door I tried was locked. I started to feel like I was in a nightmare. I walked into a random room, hoping to find some clue as to where I was, and looked out the window. To my surprise, the view outside was completely different from what I had seen when I entered the house. Instead of the driveway and the lawn, there was a vast cornfield stretching out as far as the eye could see. I tried to open the window and jump, but it was locked tight. Suddenly, everything went black and I fainted. When I woke up, I found myself in my own bed, relieved to realize that it had all been just a nightmare. Before getting up, my phone suddenly rang. I reached out for my phone and saw that it was the realtor's number. I realized that today was the day I had scheduled to look at the open house with the same realtor who had led me through the house in my dream. I did not answer the phone as I knew that I did not want to go to an open house with him.
I live with my uncle in an old Victorian house on the outskirts of town. One day, something strange happened. I was in my room, reading a book, when I heard my uncle's voice. But it wasn't his usual voice. It was deep and menacing, like it belonged to someone else entirely. At first, I thought maybe he was just playing a prank on me. But then I heard him speaking to someone on the phone in the same strange tone. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but it sounded like he was planning something ominous. Over the next few days, my uncle's behavior began to change. He was always a bit grumpy, but now he was downright hostile. He would snap at me for no reason and spend hours locked in his study, pacing back and forth and muttering to himself. I was terrified. I didn't know what was happening to him or what he was planning. I was scared to be alone with him, but I was also afraid to leave the house. Then, one night, everything changed. I heard my uncle screaming in his room, and when I ran in to check on him, he was lying on the floor, shaking and sweating. It was like he was possessed by something evil. I didn't know what to do. I thought about calling the police, but I didn't want to get my uncle in trouble. Instead, I tried to comfort him, holding him as he shook and ranted incoherently. Eventually, his body relaxed, and he fell into a deep sleep. When he woke up the next day, he had no memory of what had happened. He was confused and disoriented, but his voice was back to normal, and his behavior was more like his old self. To this day, I don't know what caused my uncle's sudden change in behavior or what happened to him that night. But I'm just grateful that he's back to normal and that we can live together in peace once again.
When I was just 7 years old, my hometown was surrounded by a creek that had become a favorite spot for me and several other kids to play. We were all familiar with the creek and knew that it was relatively shallow, with a maximum depth of only waist high. However, there was one area of the creek that was exceptionally deep and had become a favorite diving spot for all of us to show off our bravery. One day, while we were all playing in the creek, I decided to dive into the deep area and touch the waterbed. My plan was to pick up a stone and come back up to show my friends. As I reached the bottom, I found myself surrounded by a lot of seaweed. Without thinking, I reached out to grab a stone, and suddenly, the seaweed wrapped tightly around my hand, making me panic. I tried to shake off the seaweed, but it seemed to be tightening its grip on me. I felt like I was drowning, and it was the most terrifying experience of my life. With all my strength, I pulled my arms, trying to break free from the seaweed's grasp. Finally, it let go, and I swam to the surface, gasping for air. From that day on, I never went back to the creek to play. The experience had shaken me to my core, and I couldn't shake off the fear of what had happened.
I was video chatting with my friend Zara, and we were having a good time catching up on each other's lives. Suddenly, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. There was a guy standing outside of Zara's window. I couldn't believe my eyes. I quickly told Zara to be careful and that there was someone outside of her window. Zara's face turned white with fear, and she shouted to the window, demanding to know who was out there. As we both looked at the window, frozen with fear, there was a sudden knock. We both screamed, and I felt my heart pounding in my chest. I could see the fear in Zara's eyes, and I knew that she was just as terrified as I was. Zara suddenly got out of my camera view to grab her phone from the corner of her room, and I was left staring at her window. It was then that I saw the window open slightly, and I watched in horror as a guy climbed into Zara's room. I screamed and shouted, telling Zara to call the police, but she didn't respond. Instead, I could hear her laughing hysterically, and the guy who had climbed in was laughing too. I was confused, and my fear quickly turned to anger. It was then that Zara finally revealed that it was all just a prank. She and her boyfriend had set the whole thing up just to scare me. I was so relieved that nothing bad had actually happened, but I was also angry that they had put me through such a terrifying experience. After calming down, I couldn't help but laugh at the ridiculousness of it all. In the end, Zara and I made up, and we continued our video chat as if nothing had happened. But I made sure to remind her that pranks like that were not okay and that she shouldn't do it again.
I was out hiking alone in the forest, enjoying the beauty of nature and the tranquility it brings. But as the day wore on, I realized that I had lost my way. I searched for a path or trail to follow, but all I could see were trees in every direction. Just when I was starting to panic, I saw a faint light in the distance. It was my only hope, so I started walking towards it, hoping to find some kind of help or civilization. As I approached the source of the light, I began to hear strange noises coming from the same direction. They were the kind of sounds that sent shivers down my spine and made me question my sanity. When I finally reached the source of the light, I was horrified by what I saw. A group of people, all wearing scary masks, were gathered around a fire, performing some kind of ritual. I tried to back away slowly, hoping that they wouldn't notice me, but it was too late. They had already spotted me and started to move in my direction. I was frozen with fear, not knowing what to do or where to run. As the group got closer, I could see that their masks were made of animal skins and bones, and that their eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. I felt as though I had stumbled upon something truly terrifying, something that was not meant for human eyes. The group began to chant in a language that I couldn't understand, and I felt a strange energy emanating from them. I knew that I had to get out of there as fast as I could, but my legs felt heavy as lead. Just as they were about to reach me, I felt a sudden surge of adrenaline and sprinted as fast as I could back into the forest, leaving the ritual behind. As I ran, I could hear the group's eerie chanting slowly fading away. I never looked back, and I never went back to that part of the forest again. The memory of what I saw that night still haunts me to this day, and I can't help but wonder what kind of unspeakable horrors lie hidden in the deep, dark corners of the world.
I had always loved the idea of getting away from the hustle and bustle of the city and spending some time in a peaceful, rural setting. So, when I found a small cabin in a remote town, I jumped at the chance to spend some time there. The cabin was old and smelled of must and mildew, but I didn't mind. I enjoyed the rustic charm of it all. At night, however, things started to get a bit strange. I would hear strange noises outside, like rustling in the bushes or twigs snapping underfoot. At first, I thought it was just animals, but the sounds were too deliberate, too organized. One night, I woke up to a shadow moving outside my window. It was dark, and I couldn't make out any features, but I knew something was out there. The sound had stopped the moment I had woken up, and when I went to investigate, there was nothing there. No footprints, no broken twigs, nothing. The same thing happened the next night, and the next. Every time I heard the sound, I would open the window, and it would stop. I would venture outside, but I could never find anything. It was like something was toying with me, teasing me. As the days went by, the sense of unease that had been nagging at me began to grow. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was lurking just out of sight. I stopped sleeping, spending my nights sitting up in bed, waiting for the next sound to startle me out of my fitful slumber. Finally, on the last night of my stay, I decided to confront whatever was out there. I armed myself with a flashlight and a large stick and stepped out into the darkness. The night was eerily quiet, and the shadows seemed to stretch out impossibly long. I walked deeper into the woods, my heart pounding in my chest. The sounds had stopped, but I felt like I was being led somewhere, like something was drawing me deeper and deeper into the forest. And then, I saw it. A pair of glowing eyes, staring back at me from the darkness. I froze, my body trembling with fear. The eyes began to move towards me, and I turned and ran as fast as I could back to the safety of my cabin. The next morning, I packed up my things and left the cabin behind, never looking back. I still don't know what was out there in the woods that night, but I do know one thing: I'll never go back to that cabin again.
The deserted gas station stood in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by an endless expanse of desolate fields. Its cracked pavement and rusted pumps seemed to whisper tales of abandonment and decay. But despite its ominous appearance, a lone tourist had no other choice but to stop there for gas. As the tourist filled his tank, he noticed a wild monkey leaping around the station. The monkey was unlike any he had ever seen, with a fierce look in its eyes and a sinister grin on its face. The tourist tried to ignore the primate, but it seemed to be watching him intently. Suddenly, the monkey screeched and charged at the tourist. Panicking, he ran to his car and tried to drive away, but the monkey leaped onto the hood and clung on tightly. The car swerved and crashed into a ditch, leaving the tourist stranded and injured. With no other option, the tourist stumbled back to the gas station. The monkey followed him, its eyes gleaming with malice. The tourist tried to call for help on his phone, but there was no signal. As the sun began to set, the tourist realized that he was completely alone, trapped with a vicious monkey and no way out. In the darkness, the monkey's attacks became more frequent and ferocious. It seemed to delight in tormenting the tourist, who was now covered in scratches and bruises. Every time the tourist tried to escape, the monkey would appear out of nowhere, ready to pounce. Hours passed, and the tourist's hope began to fade. But just when he thought he was done for, a car pulled into the gas station. It was a group of locals who had heard his cries for help. They managed to chase the monkey away and took the tourist to safety. The tourist never forgot the terror he experienced at the deserted gas station. He later learned that the monkey was a notorious escaped pet with a reputation for attacking humans. But he could never shake off the feeling that something more sinister lurked in that desolate place, something that went beyond just a wild animal. It was a quiet night, and the streets were deserted. A lone pedestrian walked down the dimly lit alley, taking a shortcut home. As he passed by a trash bin, he noticed an overpowering smell emanating from within. Curiosity got the better of him, and the pedestrian approached the trash bin. He tried to open the lid, but it was stuck. He put his weight into it, and finally, the lid popped open with a loud groan. As the pedestrian peered into the bin, he was hit with an overpowering stench that made him gag. But he couldn't look away. Something was moving inside the bin. He reached in, his hand disappearing into the putrid mess. Suddenly, something grabbed onto him, yanking him forward into the bin. The lid slammed shut behind him, leaving him trapped in the darkness with whatever was inside. As he struggled to free himself, the pedestrian realized that the stench wasn't just from rotting garbage. There was something else in there, something alive and wriggling. He felt it moving against his skin, crawling into his mouth and nose. He tried to scream, but it was muffled by the stench and the writhing mass of filth surrounding him. The pedestrian realized too late that he had disturbed something ancient and evil, something that had been trapped within the trash bin for centuries. And now, it had claimed him as its latest victim. As the last of his strength ebbed away, the pedestrian felt the filth crawling inside him, taking over his body and soul. And he knew that he would never be free from the stench, the horror, and the unspeakable evil that now controlled him.